tell you what.
Nathan, you want to know some shit going on in my life right now?
Well, let's go for it.
I mean, I was kind of messaging you about it, but I feel like it's stressful.
You want everyone to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's stressful, and I mean, it's like a good moment, but then like who knows, tragedy might strike. But you know about Hurricane Elena that just literally wiped out, the East Coast essentially.
Yeah,
You know,
a bunch
they're
of reptile keepers were heavily affected by that.
right. Well, in Florida, Sarasota specifically, where I'm from, my family's currently living at, there was a lot of flooding near the beach, on the key. They got hit pretty hard, but nothing like you're seeing, in North Carolina and all that stuff where they just got trillions of gallons of rainfall just demolished them. But so my brother, again, him and his fiance live in Sarasota, Florida, but they're gonna get married this week in Michigan. However, they're in Florida. Her family's in Michigan. There's a Category 5 hurricane that is literally heading dead center to Sarasota, Florida, the Tampa Bay area.
Mm-hmm.
And the wedding's on Saturday. My flight is Thursday morning, and all their flights got canceled. So what they are doing is after the hurricane hits, if they're able to, they're going to drive to Michigan. And if they can't drive to Michigan because it's so bad, I have to get on that flight just in case it happens. So I might be going to Michigan for essentially nothing, or hopefully a wedding. But right now, I mean, they're looking at a Category 5 hurricane hitting them smack dab right in the middle.
And it's just going to be you, correct?
No, it's me, my pregnant wife, and my daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and my wife is also deathly ill right now, where I've tried convincing
given
her.
those circumstances, I was like, yeah, she's not going.
No, she's going. And that's the thing is she's like at night, she's like barely breathing. I'm like, hey, remember when the doctor said if you can't breathe, we should go to the ER because you can't take meds when you're pregnant? She's like, I'm fine. I'm like, I don't care if you're fine. I want to make sure the baby's freaking fine. She's stubborn, man.
Well, I mean, I guess Godspeed and good luck
Yeah.
for you and the entire family. That's a mess.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping they at least get up to Michigan and get that
Right.
wedding off without a hitch.
Exactly.
Come back to some kind of home.
Right. Let's hope that exactly. Let's hope that they can leave and they have a home left, and then we'll enjoy the wedding. But yeah, I could just imagine being my brother. I mean, he's probably stressed as can be right now. But let's get into snake talk. Should we?
Yeah. Before we get into it, just want to thank our Discord and Patreon community. You guys are awesome. We have a great group of individuals over there. This Sunday is our bi-monthly Zoom meeting. So if you want to be a part of that, make sure to hit the link below. Beyond that, like, comment, subscribe on this video. It helps us on YouTube, and then rate us on both Apple, Google, and Spotify. But Lucas, we get to talk a little bit about the taxonomy debate in reptiles.
Right.
And that's all revolving around how species, subspecies, their evolutionary relationships are classified and defined. So,
which I know very little about, and I'm happy that we have Nick Mutton coming on, because it's
same.
Yeah, if there's anybody who's going to be able to speak to this in depth, it's going to be Nick. And for those of you that don't know Nick, I mean, he's been doing this for years and years, working with and breeding pythons. I mean, at least how I know him the most is in the Morelia carpet python community. I mean, he has basically been the guy to bring to bring a population of Julitans. He has a line of Darwins. I mean, the guy, just anywhere in carpet python history, his name is all over it. And I'm sure there's even more stuff that we'll probably talk to him as well, and things that he works with that are extraordinary. But The thing that I love the most about Nick is that all I have to say is the word like taxonomy, and Nick is just gonna go. Like he's gonna go, he's gonna talk, he's gonna go down these tangents, and he speaks with passion and energy. You guys are probably gonna think he's pissed off during this episode, but he's not. That's just how much he can get into these conversations. And I'm excited to bring him on. I'm excited because it's an episode where I just get to ask questions and sit back and just let him talk and learn. Really, I'm here to take notes.
Well, and it's a topic that affects all of us breeders, but isn't necessarily always thought about. So I think it's just a good discussion to have.
Right, and we'll talk a little bit more about like what's stirring the pot for this episode, but I'll give you a little sneak peek here before we bring him on. I saw something on the Retic Nation that was posted a few weeks back, and there was a long thread and post on someone kind of critiquing the subspecies argument on how like reticulated pythons are reticulated pythons, and this idea of subspecies within other species, like green tree pythons and even carpet pythons. It was all kind of just I don't know, just a lot of people don't agree with it, and Nick is here to kind of present a different side of that argument, and I guess I would like for him to kind of inform us of the side of where people think that that there shouldn't be so many subspecies. But before we bring him on, because I think that we might have forgot to do this last episode, I want to remind you guys, our newest sponsor, Cold Blooded Cafe. If you guys are looking for rodents in the industry and you guys want clean, really good, healthy rodents, Cold Blooded Cafe is going to be the best source for your rodents. Use code Reptile Lounge 20 for 20% off. And this is going to be your ticket to getting a bunch of money off of your orders. If you order in bulk like I do and spend $700 to $1,000 at a time, 20% is going to take off a really good change. And then I do want to remind you guys, if you order over $200 off, or if you order over $200, you can also use a promo code for free shipping. They have that on their website, so you can save on shipping and you can save 20% off with our code, the Reptile Lounge 20. And then I do want to give a shout out real quick. I know that the ad's going to play for Heartland Reptiles, right? Jordan Carpenter. But if you guys do listen to the other podcasts on our network, the Chondro Lounge, you'll know that we are working up a sponsorship with him and getting his ad on the ground running. But for your indestructible cages, he is now scaling them to arboreal species, 18-inch cubes and 30-inch enclosures as well, and he plans to bring more sizes to the table. But if you guys are looking for lifelong indestructible retic or arboreal enclosures, hit up Heartland Reptiles. Ready, Nate?
I just wanted to make sure I didn't start talking muted.
You almost did.
Now I am ready.
All right, let's bring Nick on.
Can't get caught with my pants down this early.
Nick, what's going on, man? Whether you've poured your heart and soul into your reptile business or you've just begun your business journey, AE Foundry has you covered with next-level expertise in graphic design, motion graphics, videography, photography, and so much more. If you've been dying for a new logo for your reptile business, motion graphics for your current logo, a new website, or need assistance making your video podcast come to life, then listen carefully. AE Foundry's mission places storytelling at its core. AE Foundry believes that a distinctive story and background are the driving forces that set your brand apart. In today's market, consumers seek more than just products. They crave a connection built on trust with the brands they cherish. AE Foundry is committed to empowering small businesses and fostering authenticity that resonates with their consumers. Reach out to them and let them help you craft a visual narrative that helps establish a genuine and lasting connection with your audience. To contact AE Foundry, email them at aromero@aefoundry.com or on Instagram @AEFoundry. When it comes to housing your retics, trust me, you're going to want an enclosure that will be just as strong and durable as your reticulated python. The Heartland Reptile enclosure is next level tough and will outlive you and your retic by several generations. Heartland Reptile enclosures are designed and manufactured out of powder-coated aluminum to provide the highest quality and longevity available in the reptile enclosure. What makes them even better is they are lighter than your PVC and plastic enclosures out there and are extremely tough. Stop playing around with plastic enclosures for your large constrictors and step up your enclosure game with the Heartland Reptile enclosure. To inquire about one of these enclosures, speak to Jordan himself at Heartland Reptiles on Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. Here on TRL, we preach about the importance of using hooks, feeding tongs, and other tools with your reticulated python all the time. Animal Equipment by Stoney not only has all the tools you need for any snake you keep, but they have the absolute best hooks on the market. What sets Animal Equipment by Stoney's hooks apart from the other guys is their polycarbonate hook ends that provide a warm feel that won't disturb or bother your retic, ensuring a positive interaction from the get-go. Since 2008, AE Stoney has been supplying zoos, herpetologists, and other animal professionals with their tools. It's time for you to step your hook game up and buy an AE Stoney hook. To learn more and purchase one of their amazing products, visit aestoney.com.
Oh, just living the dream.
I can see you behind you.
Yeah, it's kind of an all-encompassing hobby, isn't it? It's
takes over everything when you let it.
When you're a hobbyist, you started and you got a snake in a cage, and then you had a couple of cages, and you had a whole bunch of cages. Then you eventually needed a snake room. Then if you stuck with it, you eventually needed a snake building. But then in the snake building, you didn't have any snakes in your house because you had a whole building for snakes just for that. And then they start coming back into your house because the snake building isn't even big enough to hold all the snakes. And so now I have a snake building that I've added on to twice, and I have 3 snake rooms and a walk-in incubator in my house. So my office now has 400 baby slots. That's the 2024 production behind me. Or some of it anyway.
What do you do with the color coding?
I am so old and analog. I mean, I realize there's people out there with QR codes and they're scanning stuff and doing it all digitally, and I'm like, I'm just gonna write it on a colored label with a pen. That's my level of technological advancement, I guess. It looks chaotic, but it's actually well organized. Every species, the base label is one color for every species that I keep. The reference number, their serial number is on a different color. So every single clutch has its own color and combination of colors by what clutch it's in. And they are arranged not by what clutch they're from or species they are, but what and how well they eat. So all the ones that are always going to eat frozen are on one place. The ones that are absolute total pain in the ass, dead enders that don't want to eat at all, are in another place. And this is over 30 years of doing this is what I found to be the most efficient use. Because you guys might have noticed, well, you had a whole ad like rodents are freaking expensive now.
Dude, there's so much.
You don't want to thaw 500 hopper mice and throw 200 of them in the garbage. You want to figure out how to do this so systematically as to minimize waste.
Yeah. Oh, if I with how small my collection is, like if I throw away one, I'm upset.
Especially rabbits, right? And like larger prey items, you throw away a rabbit and you're like, there goes $15, $20.
Yeah.
Paradoxically, I have giant prey coming out of my ears. I don't know what to do with it all, and I don't have enough small stuff. Like,
you want to trade?
I have almost no giant snakes, but I have like a couple really awesome hookups on like full-grown roosters and big rabbits. And
oh, geez.
And like I fed off it's like a 12-pound rabbit for like $2. It cost like $2. Like, guy just gives them to me. Like I don't know what. So I have tons of that, and I have exactly one big berm. That's it. A couple olive pythons that could eat like a 2-pound rabbit, maybe, I guess. But other than that, it's like, but I can't turn down free fruit feeders. So I just vacuum seal it, and then just eventually these retics will get bigger. And
so
I guess
let me.
I have a rock python that eats bigger stuff too. I forgot about her. But
so you mentioned olives, you mentioned AROCs, you mentioned retics. If you don't mind, can you just go into just what you've worked with over the history, what you specialize in, and kind of like what you're working with now, what you do?
It was easier to go at it the other way. I think the only species you can possibly actually obtain that I have not worked with, I've never owned a Bowen's python. There's got to be more than just a Bowen's python. Like,
and we're talking strictly snakes, not just reptiles.
I'm talking just pythons. But
pythons, okay.
I'm thinking like the number of species of python I've never kept is, you can count it on one hand. Is it just Bowen's python? Is that the only thing I've not had that you can have?
Right.
Because there's a few things that nobody has. Like nobody has a southwestern carpet. Nobody has, some of the stuff that's unattainable or seemingly unattainable anyway. Yeah, it might be maybe just Bolin's python. Like I think I've had every other species of python you can possibly obtain.
I think that's a good one to put for last too.
What?
Right.
That's a great species to put for last too.
They're not special. They're not. Why are they special? Because they're expensive. Because people price gouge. That's why. Why do people want them? Because they can't have them because they're expensive. That's all. It's like
their history is kind of neat, like where they're found in the coffee fields and like how they made their way to the U.S.
It's the fancy python.
They are only because people want what they can't have. It's why people want a Bugatti. You ever look at a Bugatti? Sure. They're ugly as ass ugly cars, but they're $3 million, so you can't have one. So we want it, even though it's butt ugly. It's like we want it because we can't have it. If Bolin's pythons were $300, they'd be way less popular. Like the exclusivity of not being able to afford it is what drives their desirability.
Right, and when you talk about like their temperature parameters and everything, they're not far off of diamond pythons.
I'm not hating on Bolin's pythons in of itself. I'm just saying they're not special. All they are is a montane scrub python. They are nested. They're not ancestral to, but they're like a early diverging branch of the Cymælia. They are a scrub python. They're not special. They're just another scrub python. A basal scrub python, but so are Halmahera pythons. So are the undescribed species from the Bismarck Archipelago. Well, they were described 140 years ago as a species. At any rate, these are all very basal members of that clade, but they're just black and live in the mountains. And it's like, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about them, but they're not like, I don't see them as this holy grail. Like, I didn't buy them when I could get them for $700 all day long. I didn't get them then. I'm not going to go pay $10,000 for one now.
Right.
Fair
enough. Not. There's a lot of other things that are just as cool.
I'll own one day, but it's definitely not going to be it's not going to be a $5,000 purchase. It's not going to be that's just I'm going to wait. I'll be patient.
It's the usual. I mean, oh, but they're so hard to breed. It's like, yeah, no, they're not. It's not that complicated either. It's like your snakes are too big and fat. End of story. Print. That's it. It's like you make your snakes too big and fat, and then they don't breed.
I was talking to a Bolin's breeder when I was at Dallas and ARBC, and he said the same exact thing.
Yeah, shocker. I've been saying it for 20 years. No one listens to me though. So it's like people, and this is wide ranging, and I know it affects Retic people too. It's like it affects every corner of the hobby, and it's an incredibly detrimental practice that everybody does. In that we have been, if you've been in the hobby for a while, you become conditioned to this idea that a healthy snake will eat and an unhealthy sick snake won't eat. And so unconsciously, we have this programming that we use food response as a barometer for overall health. And so when you pay $10,000 for some ridiculously overpriced Bolin's python that someone took you to the cleaners for, you want to see that snake eat, because every time that snake eats, it reaffirms that you're doing everything right and it's healthy, except for you're killing it with food. Because it's not supposed to. The idea that you should get this snake that you pay that much money for, and the secret to success is freezing the sap off and starving it half to death, they can't bring themselves to do it. So they keep them too warm and keep them too well fed, and they wonder why they don't do anything. It's like, and you look at everybody that ever breeds them. Are they breeding these 14-foot monsters? No. Are you finding them in the wild like that? Also, no. What breeds? 7- and 8-foot ones that are this big around. That's who's breeding. It's like all these big giant ones that are this big around, they're never going to do anything, because they fed them too much. And once you do metabolic damage to a snake by making it grossly oversized, you can't reverse that. You can't shrink a big snake.
Right.
And since they also, and this is I guess my current crusade, I get on one of these every 5 or 6 years until I make some headway. And I just beat everybody over the head with it every interview I do and stuff. And it's the quit feed your damn snake so much, and they'll never stop growing. And the Retic people are the worst. I'm already right off the bat. Let's piss everybody off. I'm on a personal sort of mission to breed every single species of python. It's like a little competition with me and a good friend of mine. So it's like friendly competition. But
you can say his name. It's okay, Ryan. Everyone knows who you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Ryan and I have been friends since he was like 17. I've known him since we were kids.
Don't you guys live like next door to each other?
What?
Don't you guys live like right next door to each other?
No. He's about 50 minutes away now. But I've known him
next door to each other.
he used to sell me crickets at the local pet shop. Like he worked there. Like if I've known this guy since we were total newbie dinglings, but that kind of feeding off each other and everything has been mutually beneficial, I think. But man, so now I got to breed all these retics just to keep up with Ryan. Well, I'm catching up. Told him I got those Salars from you, and then he went and bought some. Like, damn it! Like,
hey, that's good business, okay?
Yeah.
Competition is really driving your sales right
now. No kidding.
Kind of a goal, right? That seems like a good goal to be the person who bred the most species ever.
Right. So, no, I mean, I'd like the idea. That's a dangerous thing for me to want to do. I got to get out of that mindset.
Lucas, you've been there though. You're like, I want to breed every locality of retic that I can get.
Yeah, but I'm at least sticking with the retics. These guys are going to every species of python.
Yeah, but by the time we decided we were going to have a little competition, we both already passed the 50% of all species that exist mark. So we're already like 25, 27, 28 before we even came up with this.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's a decades of breeding this stuff. You already racked up some stats before and just started at 0. But
we've made some headway. Might as well make this a thing.
Right.
I didn't realize. Oh, Ryan's weird. Like he keeps track of this stuff. He has like a weird spreadsheet of who's bred all these different species. And I'll be damned if he hasn't bred more than anybody in the world. And I'm like number 3 on the all-time standings. Like, are you shitting me? Like I got to do better than that. I got to get those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers, right? Like.
Only 28 python species, man. Get with the program.
It would take me a while to figure out what all I bred. It's a lot. Like I added rock pythons and Western Simpsons pythons this year.
There you go. I mean,
I've never bred some of the easy ones because I don't really like short-tail pythons. And then my blood python slugged out in her first attempt this year. I'm like, I wanted to get rid of them so badly. Because it's the hump and dump. Once I hatch an egg, they're gone. I do not enjoy those things. The other short tails are better, but
sure. I heard like Borneo short tails and Sumatrans are okay. It's the bloods that are just evil.
Exactly. I have an adult pair of each of all 3 species now, and I will try them all this year. And
good luck.
The reds are nasty. The other 2 I like the Sumatrans. I quite like actually. I like them the best. But
aren't they the dark ones?
Yeah, mine are they're nearly jet black, and I think
those are cool.
All black snake are nearly so. But yeah, no, I'm tons of this stuff. So got to do all the retics, and it's getting hard to get those other retics. So
right.
Although it gets a little inside baseball because we count between Ryan and I, we're counting species that aren't even classified yet that we know are species for reasons. So
because reasons we'll delve into.
Well, there are at least 6 or 7 more species of python that people don't realize exist. At least.
Oh, I'm sure. And you know that
I for sure can tell you there's that many. But there's probably more beyond that. And I can tell you I'm not gonna, but I can tell you a couple places where you go look where you're almost certain to find a new species.
You know, and I feel like the reason why, I listened to your episode that you did with Adam on The Idiot and the Expert. It's a great podcast, but you didn't want to talk too much about the subspecies of we're going to get into the subspecies with retics and everything, but you mentioned a 4th one that's not classified. Is that part of your competition? Is that you just don't want to say it out loud so you could jump ahead?
Oh, yeah. I'm like, I know it's a species. It doesn't matter to me if nobody else cares. Like, it's a different snake.
That's awesome.
The evidence is overwhelming and crystal clear. It's whether or not there's a tendency in taxonomy in the last 20 years. I don't understand it for the life of me, but it's clearly a tendency where they will write a paper that clearly shows that this is a different snake, and then they will just not name it and make up some stupid reason to not give it a name. Oh, we need to understand this other thing that doesn't even matter. We can't. Well, okay, like in 2002, the Harvey and Barker paper on the scrub python genus, which has frankly got some problems. That paper has some pretty big problems. But one of the things they clearly showed, and even said, oh yeah, southern scrubs and barnecks are different species, but we're not going to name them because we can't be sure if they integrate in the far eastern side of their range. Except, fun fact, that doesn't matter at all. That absolutely doesn't matter at all. One of the same justifications for the chondros, which are clearly not subspecies but full species, but they just said subspecies because we don't know if they intergrade in this area. That doesn't matter. That's not a criteria that matters at all. It never has been. It never will be.
Well, wasn't that
every human alive is a hybrid should tell you something. That all three of us have genes that have intergressed from other hominid species that were not Homo sapiens. We are all 2- and 3-way hybrids. Arguing about whether hybrids matter to taxonomy is fucking kind of absurd, isn't it? Like,
let me ask you this:
is a paper written by academics who themselves are hybrids. That's like arguing about whether or not we can't call them a different species because they might hybridize. Like, the irony is, it's thick.
Isn't that the reason why? So I know that like when we're talking about Indian pythons, there's
some of the genes that intergress in the human intergression with other earlier hominid species, pre-Homo sapiens hominids, archaic hominids in South Asia, has the same exact distribution and the same causal patterns that you see with why retics are different also. Why do you have different hominids in island Southeast Asia and stuff, like Floresiensis and Luzonensis for, and these kinds of things? How did they get there? Same way the retics got there.
Right.
Well, there was one of those hominids found in one of the caves where they found some of the early pythons too.
Right. Yeah. That was outlined in the complete reticulated python. They were talking about these dwarf hominids that came from a species that were outside, but it was talking about insular dwarfism.
Yeah, in Liangbua cave on Flores.
Yeah.
The species of hominid Homo floresiensis.
There we
3.5 foot tall.
How come he said it so easy?
Because I'm like, I told you
this is random access for him. Like,
right,
it's just.
I have like a huge fascination with paleoanthropology and a bunch of other nerdy disciplines. So, it's a cave called Liangbua, and they've found several of these. They debate. Again, if you think the snake taxonomy people are goofy and have it wrong a lot of times, just delve into paleoanthropology. It's just nuts. It's nuts. Like, because the holy grail in that field is to describe a new hominid species. So everything's a new species. It's like they leave no allowance for speciation over time within it, changes over time, or individual variation within a species. And they also don't seem to understand, like, a lot of things like, you ever bred lizards?
I have not. There's lizards. There's spidey lizards that breed in my backyard. I dug them up.
Well, even like birds or something. A lot of species, snakes not so much, but in a lot of species, the juveniles immediately after birth or hatching or what have you have whatever body proportions. And those body proportions radically change by the time they're adult. You get a Nile monitor hatchling, it's 25% body and 75% tail. But as an adult, it's like 60% body and 40% tail. The tail doesn't keep growing nearly the same rate. So if a paleontologist finds a baby and finds an adult, they think they've got two different species because they almost always make the assumption that everything is an adult that they find. So when you found these dwarf hominids on Flores in this cave, the skull proportions, they think it's even more primitive than Homo erectus. It must be like an Australopith or something that we didn't know made it out of Africa. It's like, no, it's like if you're anything about insular dwarfism and stuff, that kind of stuff, you expect that stuff to change.
Right.
You end up with a concept called neoteny, which is basically when like juvenile characteristics are retained into adulthood.
Okay.
And stuff. You don't when you don't reach the original intended full size.
Let me ask you this question. So you talked about how science is like, oh well, if they can cross boundaries within each other and breed, that shouldn't be a classification. Isn't that what happened? So I might be wrong with this, and I'm sure that you'll correct me if I am, but the Python maloris was originally just one species, and then it was split into Python maloris and Python maloris pimburas, but then they brought them back together because they were found that they were breeding together in the wild?
No.
So what happened there?
They just looked at their DNA and decided they wasn't sufficiently different enough, in their opinion, to warrant being a different species or subspecies.
Okay.
Here's another thing, like...
so this is...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, this brings us into kind of like how you identify different species when they're going out and looking at them. Sometimes it's phylogenetic, sometimes it's biological, and then sometimes it's just based off site and morphological, right?
The shortest possible answer is that taxonomy is mostly just made up. It is entirely... The whole process of binomial nomenclature that was set up by Linnaeus in the 1700s that we still use sets no standard whatsoever for what constitutes a species. There is no universal accepted standard. There is the ICZN, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, is supposed to be like the governing body of all this. They don't do anything. All the rules say that we've been operating under some antiquated 200-year-old rules that don't even acknowledge, that don't say how much genetic difference, because DNA wasn't even known when the rules were made, and they've never changed it. So basically, you have to just, a species exists, and you think that this other thing you've got that's similar is different. If you want to name it as a species, you write up a paper. There's no stipulation on how long that paper needs to be, what kind of evidence. You just have to state how your new thing is different than the other thing and how it can be differentiated, and then you have to publish it according to some very archaic 200-year-old rules before mass media and the ability to distribute information. It's like you just publish and distribute a certain number of copies within so many miles of where you live. It's ridiculous. And that's still the rules, which is how you get people like Raymond Hoser and some of these people that just make up crazy shit, and it sometimes sticks because the rules have never been changed. There is no standard. How many scale counts need to be different for a snake to be a different species? Who knows? How much DNA divergence do you need to have to be a subspecies or species? However much you feel like, in the opinion of the person doing the paper. It's literally that crazy. There's nothing.
I'm going to go make all the subspecies of retics.
I mean, there isn't even a definition of a species. There's no such thing. There's about 25 different species concepts in use. Everybody learns in grade school, the biological species concept. Well, if you can't interbreed, then you're a different species. But that's really antiquated, and virtually nobody uses that anymore. If you use the biological species concept, you would have exactly one species of cat, because they can all interbreed. You can breed a freaking jaguar to a lion, a jaguar to a tiger to a lion, your house cat to a bobcat. You can do any of that. They're all the same species.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the Retic Lounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Looking for the perfect accessories for your hatchlings or juvenile retics? Look no further than Heli Guy Serpents. Our sponsor, Chris Sexton, is coming in hot with an amazing 3D printer, creating top-notch perches and other caging accessories for your beloved pets. Enrich your retics environment with their high-quality products. Use our promo code TRL10 for a 10% discount on your purchase. Visit them today at heliguyserpents.com and start giving your pets the best. Heli Guy Serpents, the premier source for 3D printed caging accessories. Again, that's www.heliguyserpents.com and use our promo code TRL10 for 10% off all of your 3D printed accessories today.
You would have exactly one species of elephant. One. That's absurd. Bonobos and chimpanzees would be the same species. All the gorillas would be one species. I mean,
even though there's largely vast differences among them.
Yeah, you'd probably have one species of python. One. Because I've yet to find I've never seen evidence of two python species you couldn't hybridize. There's no real guarantee on the fertility or the viability of the clutch, but they always seem to hatch something. And some of these lineages are separated by vast distances. Where this idea that hybrids are infertile comes from is mammals, because mammals have much more differentiated sex chromosomes than reptiles do, which their sex chromosomes are so, it allows for hybridization over vast gulfs of time. Pythons, it's unclear when pythons evolved. Originally, it was thought to be like the late Cretaceous. Now it's probably the early Tertiary, post KPG event. But not long. Not long.
I know what the KPG event is now because I read a book.
Right. All right. So not long thereafter, I did see one paper that put it at around 45 million years ago, which is much more recently. But oddly, people always think of boas. Well, boas give live birth, and that since we give live birth, that must be a more advanced trait, so they must be newer. Nope, boas are way, way, way older. Boas are a much more ancient lineage. Pythons are the new kids on the block, actually, compared to boas anyway. But so pythons evolve. The balance of evidence, it's been debated for a century, but the balance of evidence is pretty clear that it's probably in South Asia-ish, where you'll never know too much time. You're never going to know exactly where, but and then from that initial, origin there, pythons radiate in 3 radiations out from there in 3 radiations. You have the African Asian radiation, which is all of mainland Asia and Africa, and reticulated pythons are the farthest easterly members of that. You have a European python radiation, and you have the Australopapuan python radiation. What? European pythons, you say? Yeah, there was a 3rd radiation of pythons in the Eocene into Europe when Europe was not exactly where it is now, and it was much more temperate to subtropical, and you had pythons.
I believe the fossil was found in Germany.
They found a lot of fossils. The most recent one, there's a bunch of fossils of European pythons.
I think the book that we're reading said the oldest one was from Germany.
Probably.
There's a place called the Messel Pit, which is one of these like just treasure troves of information. It's one of these like where you have like this crazy like animal death trap with perfect preservation that just persists for millions of years and stuff just stacks up. And you get
similar to what we found with like the Titanoboa thing and all the vertebrae they found there.
Oh no, this is like 1,000 times better. You oftentimes get full, completely articulated skeletons with nothing out of place, skin impressions, the whole 9. It's crazy. It's like you can't believe that this exists. This is a miracle of like environmental conditions. And what they found is they found in the same exact layer. So roughly contemporaneous, you had boas and pythons both living in Germany at the same time, in the same in the same lake, in the same lake sediments of the exact same layer.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So yeah, real nuts, right? But it was a very different Germany than what we're used to thinking of Germany now. So climate changes, things shift. European pythons don't persist. That lineage becomes extinct. You're left with the Australopapuan radiation and the Afro-Asian radiation. The Australopapuan radiation basically is, do you guys familiar with the Wallace line?
Yeah.
Okay. There's actually 2 Wallace lines. Alfred Russel Wallace noticed this biogeographical line that basically cuts off what is Sundaland, which is all the stuff that becomes contiguous during glacial maximums, and then Sulawesi, the line runs right between there, and everything to the west is the fauna of Asia, and everything to the right is the fauna of Australia, basically, and Papua. Later, as a much older man, in 1910, he revised his own line and drew it on the other side of Sulawesi, which has a big impact about Retic taxonomy.
Well, and that's interesting because if you look at Sulawesi and you look at the eastern side of Sulawesi versus the western side of Sulawesi, on the western side you're going to see animals that look a lot more like the Salayers, and on the eastern side you'll see a lot of those Sulawesis, and you can compare them to the Philippine Island retics, and they look pretty similar. But when you look at them compared to like the western and the eastern sides, they look pretty different.
They are different. The southernmost Sulawesi retics are the same. They're the same biologically. Yeah. There's not really any daylight genetically between them.
Yeah.
So it's just easier to get salar animals. Well, it's easier. It's an island that has real distinct boundaries, but where does this thing stop on the mainland of Sulawesi is a little harder to pin down. But the revised 1910
Wallace.
Well, there's Weber's line. I keep on to say Weber's line. That's further east and affects more of my Australian stuff. But the Wallace line's revision, if you look at it, it literally goes along the eastern coast of Sulawesi, hugs the coast of that, and then dips down through the Lesser Sundas Islands where it originally did. But what that does is it puts Salar on the side with southern Sulawesi, and it puts the other islands where all the Jampienses occur on the other side of the line. And wouldn't you know it, that's why they phylogenetically seem to key out. We didn't learn that for a full century after the fact, but it's consistent with his revised 1910 Wallace line. And that's how you end up with, which also then shows that you must have had 2 different dispersals of retics into that area at different times from different parental stock. You would have had because if you look at the retics in the Sulawesi,
I feel like Nick,
and the Salar retics are very closely related to each other, but further away from the animals. But the retics, the Jampiensis, are actually more closely related to the retics further west, like on Sumatra. Like they're more closely related to that. They're not those things, but that would be their next closest relative, not the retics on Salar, which they are very geographically close to.
I feel like what Nick just did right there when he paused and he like figured out a way to say it was like where Michael Scott in The Office is like, explain it to me like I'm 8. Like I feel like he took a moment right there to do that for us. He's like, hold on, let me slow this down.
Stuff is kind of wonky and complicated. I mean, but just because animals disperse over water, vicarious dispersal over water, they raft, they get to whatever new population on some rare occasion, that doesn't happen necessarily just once. You can have multiple dispersals from different places at different times, and you end up with kind of a convoluted situation and stuff. And retics are full of that. There's other stuff further east that like, well, how did that happen? Oh, people probably. Yeah, it's so.
Yeah. I mean, they from them just being stowaways on boats or used for pest control. Like, there's so many ways beyond just.
I find the pest control hypothesis on ships to be very lacking. I think it's more likely the same reason why you had tortoises making the rounds. It's like, well, we got a long ocean crossing and we need fresh meat. What can I stick in this wicker basket and not feed it or give it any water for a freaking month, and then it'll still be fresh meat alive in a month from now? A big snake or a tortoise.
Right.
And so and that's probably how these things got to where they are. That could have been a very long time ago too. I think their estimates in the one paper suggested like the timing lines up with like, Ming Dynasty Chinese traders and the trading in cloves on like Ambon and everything probably were why the retics there 600 years ago. It's like that's about the timeline. And, oh well, that makes sense why you would be there and when you'd be doing that.
So when we get into the taxonomy breakdown of reticulated pythons, for those that aren't aware, and if you're not, I would definitely go back and listen to the book club episode. But Malaopython reticulatus has 3 subspecies in there. So you have Malaopython reticulatus, and you have Malaopython reticulatus saputri, and you have Malaopython reticulatus jampianus. For those that don't know what I'm saying, the saputris, generally you can refer to those as the Tambalongans and Salayers, and then obviously there's other islands in that we just don't have in trade right now. And then you're also talking about the southern part of Sulawesi. Jampianus is going to include the Kaliwatis, the Madu, the Karumpas, the Karumpalompas, the Kalatoas, and then the Malaopython reticulatus is everything else right now in the world. And if you guys aren't aware, retics have the largest span of any other python in the world. And so I think one thing for me is I see a lot of people that don't agree with needing to create, or there doesn't need to be the subspecies because they're all the same species, right? But to me, like when you look at the research and the papers and the genetic diversity within Morelia, and even further into Morelia with chondros, right, with green tree pythons, viridis and pulcher and all that stuff. It's mind-blowing to me that people don't want to look into or even accept the fact that there are more than just 3 subspecies of reticulated pythons, and I kind of want to hear your thought on that.
Their opinions are without any merit at all. I'm just going to say it. Like, what is their opinion? Why do they not like the idea that retics are more than one snake? Why? And the answer is invariably, I just don't like it. I don't want to change. I don't like new data. It's like, it's never like a rational scientific argument. It's always like, why do I have to accept these new names? It's always like there's a grumpy old man yelling at clouds. It's never anybody that the people argue, they don't read these papers. They don't like, it's like, and let's be honest, like the retic community is built on hybrid morph snakes. Virtually every retic you can possibly find is a morph of some sort and is also a hybrid of some sort.
Yeah, it's a world first craze.
If you accept that all your retics are hybrids, that kind of sucks. And so it's easier to just deny the fact that they can't be hybrids because these aren't valid species, because then I feel better about everything. That's what drives a lot of this sort of silly sentiment. The fact that they sought to hybridize them in the first place tells you that they're a different snake. Because if they were the same snake, why would you mix them together? It's like the reason they did that is because. And the same with the condor people. I go after them all the time. It's like, yeah, the reason you're breeding everything to a Biac is not because a Biac's the same thing. It's because it's quite clearly different. That's why you're doing this. If it was the same thing, you wouldn't do it. You're doing it, oh, that slightly bigger, nasty thing with the yellow blotches, a totally different color green, and a different head shape. Oh, yeah, that's the same thing. You're doing it because you know it's a different snake. It's like
that's the whole premise of designers.
Anybody that can hold a Jampiensis and then hold a Bali retic, I'm just using the ones I've got, I guess. Like, and tell me that's the same snake. Are you out of your cotton picking mind? Like, they're obviously different snakes. They're obviously different snakes. Right. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. Is it inconvenient? Not really. Who cares? It is what it is. And you can't have sacred cows, so to speak. Like, okay, like my main wheelhouse, most people know me mostly for breeding carpet pythons. And I do a lot of that. It's my favorite group of snakes. For 30 years, I've been breeding all that stuff and working with those guys. I wrote a book about 12, 13 years ago on carpet pythons. And then I put another one out a couple years ago. Me and my co-author did a second edition, which is basically a completely different book. We just rewrite everything. And we had to read.
It's massive too. I love it.
Yeah, it's like 650 pages. It's a light bathroom reading for sure. But the phylogenetic arrangement is changed. It's not completely different, but it is different. We had to change things because that's how science works. Now, a decade later, we have more papers, more evidence. I had Warren Booth, probably everybody seems to know Warren.
Yeah.
Warren's a good friend of mine. And so I had Warren run, there's a phylogenetic paper in the book. I had him run a bunch of samples and generate a phylogenetic tree just for the book. And you know what? I had to change my own opinions on what I thought was previously true based on new evidence. And you know what? In another 10 years, if I get more evidence that says that it's something different, then that's what I'm going to go with. You go with what the evidence says, not what you feel. Because that doesn't really matter. It's like the evidence is clear. These are different snakes. And the retics are different snakes. And if you think there's just the three, you're wrong. There's way more than that. I guess.
I mean, I can even vouch, like, again, I have 8 localities in my garage, and I can tell the differences outside of just pattern and color, but even with behavioral differences. And again, I know that behavior can change from animal to animal, but there are some generalizations that you can make with a certain specific area. But I mean, I think Nathan, who, he doesn't have a large collection, but he's been able to come over, and he's also been to our buddy Phil's house, and he's been able to get his eyes on a Halmahera and a Ternate.
And I have Wildfire up the road from me too. So me saying that these small retics behind me are even close to the same as what Weston's got in his giant garage over there, it would be kind of silly for me to assume that.
Right. In terms of disposition with retics and with anything else, there's a hereditary component to that. What we deem as aggression or flightiness and the things we all lump together under the disposition sort of heading, that's all basically fight or flight response, which is a huge contributing factor to that is adrenal gland output. Animal gets scared, it's fight or flight time. How much adrenaline does that snake pump into the system? And that's going to dictate in large measure how it's going to react. And what happens is we've proven that this is a movable target because your dog is not a wolf anymore. Your dog loves you, wants to hang out, and is kind of dumb half the time. My dogs are. It's like, they're not wolves. We've domesticated them. And what is the process of domestication? It's primarily selectively breeding for lower and lower adrenal gland output. And you reduce fight or flight response, and it results in docility. Nature can do the same thing. You'll see, why are Biak chondros consistently the nastiest chondros? Yeah, probably because they have higher adrenal gland output. Why would there be? So when you see geographic distribution in different non-interbreeding populations where some are consistently flightier and some are consistently more aggressive and some are more mellow, those things are hereditary too over time. That is a small bit of evidence for speciation. When it's consistent, it's not like enough to make a species, but it is a contributing factor.
Yeah, it's a part of the larger picture when you start to see other differences as well.
Okay, and as far as, in my opinion, and in the opinion of anybody that is honest, really, you have basically 3 criteria for how to tease things apart for species that you should all give some weight to. Unfortunately, a lot of papers lean really heavily on 1 or 2, or not really on all 3. All 3 would be considered the total evidence approach, and why wouldn't you want all the evidence? of course you should want all the evidence. And those three stools are basically, you can use your molecular tools, genetics. How genetically different are these things? And that's pretty magical, and everybody's in love with that because that's our newest tool in our toolkit. The oldest thing is morphological analysis. How do they differ physically? And then the third thing is biogeography. Are these animals interbreeding anymore? When was the last time they could have interbred? Will they ever be able to interbreed again? All these things. And if you have an animal that is physically different, is genetically different, and is on its own separate evolutionary trajectory, and that it is not now and will not in the future be interbreeding with any of its related species, it's a different thing at that point. And those retics meet all three of those things. They are not interbreeding at any point in the now or likely in the future at the rate the Earth's going. That doesn't seem likely. They haven't been in a long time. They are morphologically, genetically, and different, and they're reproductively isolated and have been so. And that is why they are different things. So whether you like it or not doesn't really matter. It just is. It just is. You know, and the particularly of the two recognized subspecies, the Saputri is way more. They're way different genetically. They're much more. They are less. Actually, more morphologically and genetically different. They don't look that much. They look more similar to the other retics further east, but their scale counts are way different. And then it's in terms of like snake scale counts and for purposes of taxonomy, the holy grail is when you get like non-overlapping ranges, like these range from this many ventrals to this many, and these other ones are over here, and they don't even overlap in the middle at all.
Right.
And all the scale counts for those guys, the salars, do not overlap.
And I mean their head structures are blunted too. I mean they don't have the long.
They have more scales. They have more of every scale, and they have the low end of their range for like ventral scales is higher than the high end of the range for regular pythons. They don't even overlap.
What's really cool is I have my female Salayer. She's an F1 from the original wild caught pair that came in with the Retic ranch line. She's older now, so she's larger. When you get her just sitting still and you look at the top of her head and how big her head is, but how tiny the scales are across her head and just how many there are, it's insane.
And why is that? What on that island and in southern Sulawesi is favoring smaller scales?
Yeah, who knows?
Something. There's always a driver for these sorts of changes. It's sometimes hypothesized that higher scale counts is an adaptation to drier climates because it has some moisture preserving effect. I don't know much about the topology and of Salar Island if it's a drier island. Some of those lesser Sunda islands are kind of dry for Indonesia. Anyway, dry on the drier side for that part of the world.
Yeah, so I mean, Salayer obviously it's surrounded by the ocean, but it actually has a lot of what are they called? Marsh type ecosystem. So in the middle, there's plenty of areas that you could take a canoe or a boat and kind of paddle through. It's got a lot of water that comes through channels, but as far as like rain and that kind of stuff goes, what I think that actually might be in the book. We didn't really talk too much in the episode we did about the rainfall too much, but I'd be curious to go back and measure that compared to other islands now.
Yeah. If you look at another, not necessarily similar, but for the sake of conversation, like the Centralian or Brettles python is probably my favorite species of python. They're basically an island species that's landlocked. They are in an island in the middle of Australia, meaning they live in a dry-ass desert in the middle of Australia that is surrounded by an even drier desert where they're just stuck in this, like, the rules of island ecosystems sort of apply even though they're in the middle of the continent. It's just the area around them is so inhospitable to most things that they're kind of stuck in this hemmed-in little area where it's slightly less dry. But so they're genetically off the charts different from all the other.
That's the reason why I won't keep them in my garage, is because my garage is 60-70% humidity all the time.
You could probably keep them out. You're in Texas. You could probably keep them outside if you built the cage right. You could probably do it. But they back to that point, they have the most scale. They have the higher scale counts. Every scale count in the carpet complex, they have the highest in everything. Even if there's overlapping ranges, they average higher. In a lot of cases, they're non-overlapping. They have just way more smaller scales.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know, but those retics are valid things. And whether people don't like it just because they just don't like it, that doesn't really matter. And there's more, and they're going to really not like that either, I suppose. You got to think, like, Indonesia is 14,500 and some odd islands, and there are retics on most of them. Like, most of them have retics. Yeah. Like, you think there's only this many species? Like, and some of these islands, like, yeah, we will never live. There'll be centuries. You'll never find them all. They'll come and go and become extinct before they're described. There's too many islands. You might discover major groupings, but you're never going to have a full accounting of what's on all those islands. It's just not realistic.
Well, I mean,
just getting to those islands is near impossible. So
yeah. Also, you've got these major biogeographic barriers, like the Wallace Line, both versions, I guess. Retics are one of the only things that crosses those lines pretty well. Like, and it's difficult to cross Wallace's line and get to the other side. And when you do, you become a different thing over time, because the odds are it's so hard to get across those things because it's mostly just governed by ocean currents. If the currents were favorable and they just wash you to the next island, then great, you'll probably make it. But if the currents are unfavorable, which they are, they flushes you out in the open ocean and you die, which is why not many things cross some of these major lines. It's all ocean currents. And so if they made it across Wallace's line once, that's not very often that's going to happen. And the odds are there's going to be, just periodically bouncing back and forth, trading genes across this. No, that's not going to happen. They made it once. Hell, maybe twice. The retics are really good at this. But once on the other side, they are on their own. And given time, they become something else. There's, of the many different species, the one everybody's in love with now is the phylogenetic species concept. And the reason why some academics like to piss on the idea of subspecies is for whatever nonsensical or completely arbitrary reason, a lot of phylogenetics people don't believe in the taxonomic rank of subspecies. But they're disingenuous typically when they bring it up because they never say that. They say, this subspecies isn't valid. We don't find the subspecies is valid. Well, yeah, no shit. You don't find any subspecies valid because you don't accept that there is such a thing as a subspecies. So magically, of course, none of them are valid. But when you don't say that, I just don't believe in the concept of a subspecies, that's a bit disingenuous in my book.
Can you again dumb it down for some of us? Phylogenetic, what are you referring to?
Phylogenetics?
Yep.
Phylogenetics is I'm trying to think of what the easiest way to explain this is. It's a method for understanding the relationships between not just individual species, but larger and larger groupings and how it all relates to each other, what's related to what group is related to what other group, what individuals in that group, and how closely they're all related to each other. You end up, our understanding of like evolutionary processes has changed so much in the last 100 years and stuff. It's like, everybody remember, I'm old enough to remember in school and they'd show you that stupid drawing of the March of Progress with some like dumb old caveman hunched over, just gradually walking more upright. And then it's like a dude in a suit. It's like complete nonsense. And what you find is that the family trees, if you will, of organisms look like really, really, really convoluted bushes. And everything's branching out, and most of the branches don't go anywhere. And then every once in a while, this branch over here will go over here and boink the thing on the other branch over here, but then they'll stop again. And it's just like, it's much more chaotic. Even in our own lineage, we're like the horniest animal on Earth, apparently. What we find with like
next to dolphins,
that surprises you?
Like this idea that there's one species of human alive at the one time is a really new thing. 100,000 years ago, there were like 6. And we were banging all of them. Like every time that we have any evidence where 2 hominid groups came into contact, they always fucked them. Always, like 100% of the time. Like it's crazy.
This reminds me of a bit Ari Shafir did in his special Jew.
Of modern humans in Europe with Neanderthals multiple times. We have evidence of modern humans intergressing with Denisovans, another archaic hominid group that's more closely related to Neanderthals. We have evidence of Neanderthals and Denisovans interbreeding with each other. We even found the bones and got the full DNA sequence of a first-generation hybrid of 2 different hominids. One parent from one species, one parent from the other species. Also in Ireland, when you get to the Solomon Islands and stuff, you have evidence of genetic integration from a ghost population, an earlier archaic hominid that we don't even have any fossils for, but it wasn't any of the other known actors. We don't know who it was. In West Africa, the same thing, a ghost population, another hominid species that wasn't anybody we know for sure genetically, but we know it's there. They interbred. It's like, this is the story of this is how life itself works. And these snakes are no different. if given the opportunity, they will interbreed, and they can over vast gulfs of time.
Yeah, I mean, there's been arguments of Malayo-Python timoranis, and how they interbreed with retics in the wild. A lot of people are making that argument. I've never seen a picture of one in the wild, hatched.
I'll call bullshit on that. I mean, it's like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and don't get me started on all the nonsense with Timoriensis. Like, I don't know. Some of these are people I even know and like, but on that island, you have a population of patternless animals. And every time anybody finds one, they think they found a new species. Oh, this one's on this island must be a new species because they look all different. It's like, yeah, no, it's just a morph in the wild. The idea that morphs it should sink in by now, considering how many of them we have and how often we breed them, and it's the driving force of the whole hobby. But the idea that a simple single gene mutation for patternless, which is super common in a lot of wild things, is just floating around at a fairly high frequency in a wild population, doesn't occur to anybody. They jump right to, oh, that's a different thing. It's like, nope, because there's normal Timor pythons on that same island. It's like, nope, it's just patternless. Most of your scrub pythons have a recessive patternless gene in the wild population that comes in fairly regularly, and you show up. Xanthics show up all the time because there's not enough negative selection pressure against some mutations. If you're an xanthic, you probably won't get eaten by a predator. Right. If you're half patternless, you're probably not at a greatly increased predation risk. So these sorts of neutral mutations, they don't convey benefit, but they don't convey enough of a downside in terms of predation risk, can persist. And then people think there was just a viper that a friend of mine bred, and he bred the newly described species of viper, which is a terribly written paper. And then the babies came out, and a bunch of them were the previous species of viper. It's like, yeah, because that's not a real species. It's just a freaking color morph in the wild that they named as a species. Like, nobody thought it suspicious that they didn't use any DNA in the paper, and that the entire range of the new species was right smack as a dot in the middle of the range of the other species. It's like,
okay, so I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy in thinking that a lot of the scientific stuff that's being put out is not accurate.
Anacondas.
Yeah, so let's
that's
talk.
Like the first thing that pops in my mind is this new anaconda paper. Yeah.
Okay, well, there's two kinds of like bad papers, I guess. You can have a paper like the viper paper that's just nonsense, and I could have told you it was probably going to be nonsense just before you even read these things. Like, that's not how anything works. There needs to be something that keeps things separate for them to come into their own as a new species. If there's no barrier to reproduction, that never happens. And the anaconda paper, are there two species of green anacondas? Maybe, but I don't think they made a good argument. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. I'm saying they didn't make their case. They didn't do a good enough job proving their case. It might be true, but the case was somewhat lacking. If you can't tell me where one thing stops and the other thing starts, it's like, that's to raise some eyebrows, doesn't it? It's like then if the things at the bottom of the range are genetically one way and the things at the top are genetically another way, but you can't tell me where one becomes the other or any hypothesis of how that would happen, and you have continuous distribution and all that, then what you probably have is a cline over time and distance, not a separate species. But I don't know, maybe somebody will prove that that was one of the, I wouldn't put that in the same category as a totally bad paper, but I think they might have jumped the gun, and you need more evidence to bolster that case.
I mean, the paper really pushed this whole 5% DNA difference in that, we're only 2 or 3% different than primates.
You are a primate, and you're far less different than that. Like, you are considerably less than that different from a chimpanzee.
Is that the reference that they were making?
I don't know. So I always wondered why. Like, I always find that hysterical. I find like these, like, oh my god, like these retics aren't different enough to be a separate subspecies. Like, well, if that's the case, then you're a chimpanzee. And last I checked, chimpanzees were in Pan, not in Homo, but they're not even the same genus. But we're like, nobody questions that. Like, it's like the difference between those Salar retics and a retic on Sumatra is greater than the difference than a human and a chimpanzee. They're more different from each other than we are from chimps. And last I checked, we're not chimps, and no one's making that argument. So why you can't have two different sets of rules,
right?
Different things, but there is a million sets of rules, because I mean, it's ridiculous. there are species of birds and species of frogs that are classified entirely on the sounds that they make. Oh, this bird in this valley makes this as its call when it's looking for females, and the same damn bird in the next valley over sings a different song. Here it goes to different species. There are species that are described that don't have like they just like, oh, I found this at a fish market in the freaking Amazon, and it's a new species. No idea where it was even found. Like it's like new species. Like it's the Wild West. I mean, so
it's what it seems like. I mean, if rules haven't changed in how we classify them since the 1700s.
When I say that, it makes it sound like that would probably give listeners the wrong idea in that in every little subset of biology, there's like this little cabal of academics that write all the papers on that thing. And sometimes that leads to absurdity. In the case of pythons, it's, again, this small little group of people that write these papers, mostly. And so their opinion on these issues holds a lot of sway, more than it frankly should. And they are generally ridiculously conservative. They expect the most ridiculous level of differentiation to be different species. They hold these pythons to a standard that is just absolutely like, I read one, it was on carpet pythons. A lot of times they don't give you like a percentage of different. That's kind of a thing that we as hobbyists like because it makes it very easy to digest. It usually isn't presented in that way, but it was the paper found that inland carpets were almost significantly different enough to be a different thing because they were 4.9% sequence divergent from the other carpets. But the magic number for them was 5. I'm like, 5%? 5%? Like an Asian elephant is less than 5% different from an African elephant. Like we are way closer together than chimpanzees in that. But somehow these carpet pythons need to be 5%. That's an unimaginably different threshold. It's absurd to hold these things. And considering that reptiles evolve slower than mammals do, like 5% of them is even more significant. Like it is indicative of a much longer period of being separated. Think about like, okay, evolution works by the buildup. This is going to turn into an evolution lesson. Okay. Think about
I'm down for it.
What is the process by which evolutionary change happens? It is the buildup and accumulation of mutations, random spontaneous mutations. That, frankly, a lot of them will just kill you. But every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, it helps you. But they don't happen that often. That's a pretty rare thing that happens. And it's really rare if it's beneficial. And if enough of these things that are beneficial build up over vast periods of time, you become a different species if you're reproductively isolated, okay? So reproductive rate and reproductive output over time radically affects the rate of evolutionary change. Think about a python. Okay, look at a retic. I realize you guys are breeding retics at like ridiculously young ages, but you know those damn things got to be 8 or 10 years old before they even think about laying an egg in the wild. They're not laying nearly as many eggs because they got to work for a living. So their reproductive output over time, I bet you'd be hard pressed to find a female retic that produced more than 100 babies in its entire lifetime. You know, might live 30 years. I bet it never cracks 100. They don't have the luxury of having. They don't have the luxury of excess body mass for giant clutches of eggs. These giant 50 egg clutches are a thing that exists in captivity. That wild snakes don't really do that because they don't have the luxury. They're barely eking out an existence. They don't have the luxury of food that just shows up and they don't got to burn any calories to get it. And then most pythons, even in captivity, I mean, a lot of people don't like this because confront this, but it's true. Unless it's a ball python or an antaresia, for some reason, those things just go forever. But most pythons, if you're being honest, if you get 4 or 5 clutches out of a female in its entire lifetime, that's about all you can ever really hope for, isn't it? You got any? How many retics do you have that laid more than 5 clutches in their lives? Probably not very many, I suspect.
I have one that is a wild caught female, and she just laid her 4th.
Yeah.
And she was imported in 2012. So,
I'm not saying they can't or that they don't ever. I'm saying that on average, that's about all you're realistically going to get. The total of reproductive output on a female, you've seen what they look like when they lay eggs. They look like they're about to drop dead.
Yeah,
even my Solaire, she's my oldest by captive standards. I don't know the true age of any of the older wild caughts that I have, but she's 14 and she laid her first clutch at 7, and then she's had one every 3 years since. So she's just had her third clutch with me last year.
Okay. So now just do a quick mathematical back of the envelope and compare the reproductive output of a mouse to a reticulated python. If you assume your retic, let's just be generous and say it's going to last 20 years in the wild. Probably not. Let's say a female lives 20 years. And let's say she makes 100 offspring over 4 clutches in her lifetime, and that's it. And she was 10 years old when she got finally began to lay her first clutch. That's not that many animals, and most of those are not going to live. They're going to go right back in the food chain. That's only 100 chances in its entire lifetime reproductive output for a beneficial mutation to pop out that moves that animal one step closer to being another species. That's pretty slow. That takes something like a mouse that breeds when it's 8 weeks old. It's born, and 8 weeks later it gives birth, and then 8 weeks later it's a grandmother, and then 8 weeks later after that you see this population explosion because of this high number of offspring, ridiculous turnaround time, and a female mouse is going to crank out way more offspring. Even that original mouse is going to have way more than 100 babies in the course of its lifetime before it dies of old age at 1.5 years old. It's going to have cranked out a ton, and by then it'll have 10, 20 generations of its offspring are going to be making, and each generation, each individual produced from that, and the descendants of that one animal is an opportunity for a beneficial mutation to arise. Now, take the retic and its descendants over, let's say, a century. How many chances do you have off that one female and her female offspring to produce a beneficial mutation? Not really that many when you compare it to the tens of millions of chances you'll get with a mouse over that same span of time. Because the generational turnaround, 10 years versus 8 weeks, like, it's crazy. So of course mammals are going to evolve faster. The chances of a mutation popping up are just exponentially higher because the reproductive output over time is so much greater.
That kind of just blew my mind.
Imagine really slow in whales and elephants for that matter too. Because if you have one offspring every 2 years, like, you're really not, and you're 12 or 15 before you have the first one, you're really not going to go real slow. Which, funny enough, look back at like extinct elephants from 30 million years ago. It's like they're recognizably.
They look the same.
Well, there are some differences in tusk morphology, but they're kind of, you definitely recognize it as an elephant, though, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, these things are.
Maybe they had fur because it was colder.
That stuff matters.
Yeah, no, I've never thought of it from that perspective, but it makes sense why mammals.
I think of things like insects that are faster than that, where it's just like, it's insane. Think of like your dubia roaches. Like, if you're no one's selectively breeding their dubia roach colony, but imagine if you were picked a trait, how fast you could get a turnaround going with that, right?
Right.
Like, because the reproductive output over time is so absurdly high.
I mean, you see it in the isopod community a bunch.
Yeah, I've done it with the carpet python sitting behind me. I have pure white carpet pythons, like
no, you
jungle
don't.
carpet. Well, they're
that's
they're jet black and bright white, and that just took one dingaling in Spokane, Washington, selectively breeding for 29 years or whatever it's been.
I need one.
And I just bred all the yellow out of them, and now they're just white. And
what locality?
Oh, they're not locality specific. They're just started with generic. No, they are just generic yellow jungle carpets that over 9 generations and 30 years, I bred all the yellow out of them. Instead of breeding more yellow, I bred for no yellow, and now they're black and white.
Damn.
Just because I thought it would be cool to do that. And I'm just like, the rules of evolution work at whether you are deciding who gets to breed to who, or nature is deciding. If nature decided that was better and that works better in the wild, then that's what you get. It's just, I'm just doing it on faster. I have Darwin carpets that are completely striped from head to tail. And it took me 3 generations to make banded snakes into completely dorsally striped snakes. These things are pretty easy. Like, phenotypically plastic is the term for these sort of surface level traits that affect appearance that don't really, they're not going to affect any sort of genomic differences at any detectable level, but they change the appearance rather rapidly.
You say it's easy, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't have an eye for it.
I don't know that I have an eye for it. You know why? Like, I've got to where I am in the hobby because I just never, all right, you guys have both been in the hobby for a while. And you've known a lot of people that have been in the hobby for even longer, probably. And you'll notice that most people in the hobby at some point or other throw in the towel, get out of the hobby, and then maybe they get into it again years later. People jump out of the hobby for a whole host of reasons. But just imagine if you just stuck with it and just kept going for like 30 years and you never bailed out at all. You just kept on plowing ahead. Eventually, you would just get somewhere. And so I have all this stuff. Now, I don't think I'm particularly good at breeding snakes even. I just persisted. I just never gave up. I never sold off all my collections, said fuck it and quit. I just kept going. And so that collection just kept advancing over time. And I just kept chugging along. And without actually having stopped, you get somewhere.
Right.
It's like going to the gym or something. It's like it's the same thing. It's like it's just
if you keep going, you'll eventually look good, right?
It's a participation trophy.
I'm banking on that statement, Lucas.
Right, same here.
I am like I'm the world's oldest gym rat. I think it works. When you're old, it sucks, but like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't count myself old, but I definitely don't recover like I did when I was in college.
Matt, wait till you're over 50. It really sucks. But,
yeah, I don't know. At that point, I think I'm just going to look for someone to throw me a cane and just throw in the towel.
I think I started about 10 years ago. I was super overweight. I'm only 5'8" and I weighed 320 pounds. So picture 320 pounds at 5'8" is basically a human meatball.
Yeah, I mean, my brother's 5'8" and he got up to 240 and he was a human meatball there.
Yeah, I was 320. And then I decided, I need to take better care of myself and got serious about fitness and lost 120 pounds and got into bodybuilding as a hobby and stuff. And it is just like a participation trophy. You just keep going. And day to day, you don't really notice anything, but over longer periods of time, you do get somewhere. It's like you just keep chugging along. It doesn't matter what it is. If you just keep putting the time in and keep putting the work in and keep grinding, eventually you'll get there.
And this is how Nick's motivation to breed snakes for 30 years and change the way they look started.
Yeah, it's the same as everything else. You just put the time. Everybody wants a fast return. They don't want to put the time in. They want the easy. They want to skip to the front of the line. They don't want to wait. Why would I want to raise up a baby? I'll just buy an adult and then I don't got to wait. I want satisfaction now. And it's like, and it never works. It's like everybody's always it's chasing the next big thing. And it's these sorts of mindset, I think, really, I think it robs people of, and I know it must in the Retic community because it certainly does in the ball pie, but in every morph-based subset of the hobby, it's the same thing. You basically end up in a situation you cannot win and a goal you can never achieve. Because even if your goal is to make make up 7 random Retic genes in a combination, doesn't even matter. And that's you're going to make that 7 gene combo and that's that's what's pushing you forward. You're going to make it and God damn it, you're going to get there and you put the time in and then you finally get there. There's no satisfaction at the end of that road because the second you hatch the 7 gene thing you thought you wanted to make, what are you doing? You're already, well, now I have to add this other thing to it to make the 8 gene thing. It's like you never can get to that because you don't appreciate the thing for what it was in the first place. You're always chasing. You're just chasing something, a feeling you can never really get to in a way.
And I see a shift happening right now in the Retic community. And Nathan, you can tell me if you think that this isn't correct, but I mean, and maybe it's not as much as I think, but maybe it's because it's pretty much all that I breed and people buy my animals. So therefore I think there's a shift happening, but there seems to be more people coming in that are appreciating the natural variation and locality aspect of reticulated pythons.
I mean,
that me on the morph side, I would say that people aren't looking for the crazy gene stacked animals.
5 gene combos anymore.
Yeah, they realize that's going to be a browned out animal. They're looking for good examples of 1 or 2 gene animals.
Is it pretty? It's like that's like
it's a pretty. I mean, at the end of the day, and that's what it is. I mean, didn't you just posted a some beautiful coastal red freaking snake, and I'm pretty sure it's only 2 genes, but it looks phenomenal. It's a coastal carpet.
It's a hypomelanistic striped Rettles python.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's a pretty snake. It took me 15 years to make it, but it's like well, they take 4 years to mature, and it's a long process with some of that stuff. But
that's part of the craft, right? Is you take that long to produce an animal, and it's more desirable than the 7 gene animal in the Retic world. But I'm just seeing a shift over. And again, I think it's just because I'm in that market with locality stuff, and people ask me questions. But I don't know. Maybe it took 30 years for people to be like, "Oh wait, we should probably appreciate where these animals come from."
Yeah, I like all the morphy, carpety stuff I produce. I don't dislike it. I make it. I made a triple morph, the first ever Brettles python. It's a hypomelanistic genetic striped stonewash.
And it's pure Brettles.
Yeah. And it's neat. It's a long road to get there. But if I had to choose between the morph side of what I do and the wild type side of what I do, I'd get rid of all those morphs in a freaking second. Like, it's not better than any of this normal stuff. It's just different. And I do.
But I will say, in the carpet community, you guys have the luxury. You guys have the luxury in the carpet community where you have quite a bit of subspecies and different localities. I mean, in the U.S., we're capped at. Well, I guess it's not that different. I mean, in the U.S., as far as like what we can breed, I think we're probably at 10 localities, 11, 12.
It's a struggle with these carpets to keep them pure, because the same forces that made most retics, I mean, if your retic has a Propentia dwarf blood in it, it's not a pure retic anymore. It's a hybrid of whatever percentage. And that same problem is rife. The carpet python people pretty much invented that whole dog and pony show of hybridizing all the subspecies, and they've been screwing stuff up for way longer in the retic crowd.
Yeah, no, like, you guys went to war in like early 2000 with that, and the retic people are just now getting into that war.
Well, I heard about that.
I went to war at it. I don't know how many other people. It's like, I can only do so much as an individual. I do as much as I possibly can to preserve the genetic integrity of the gene pool of the species I care about, because I honestly, if I drop dead tomorrow, I don't know who else is going to pick that up and run with it. I don't have a lot of faith. I don't. It's people can only keep so many things. I can keep a lot of things because I don't have to go to a regular job. I just do this, so it allows me to keep more snakes. But I keep whole lineages of things that are not even profitable, just because if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. Like, I feel like I don't see anybody else. And I can point to multiple lineages of things I used to work with that were relatively well established. And I thought, well, I don't have to work with that. I need to clear out some space. I'll part with this group of that. And then now they're gone. They just don't exist anymore. There was a really beautiful line of coastal carpets that were kind of like a gold and a faint purple color of all things. Absolutely beautiful. Went back to Lloyd Lemke. I don't know if you guys remember who Lloyd Lemke was. He's been dead for 25 years probably now. A real heavy hitter back in the day.
Yeah, that name doesn't ring a bell.
He had way, way, way back. And I bred them. I had a couple of friends that bred them, and then I sold off the ones I had to make space for something else, probably a stupid morph or something. And yeah, those don't exist as a distinct lineage at all. They literally don't exist. You can't, all the money in the world, you couldn't find one. They're just gone.
Sad.
They just got absorbed into the generic morph coastal gene pool and no longer exist as a distinct entity.
You know what's funny?
Nobody can be bothered to keep it going.
You know, what's funny about that in the retic world, and what I'm doing with the Calatoas that I have, and I get so much crap for it. We had Riley on an episode to talk about this, but you talk about like line breeding, right? And you talk about keeping a lineage, pure, right? I mean, there's you can take a line of a certain animal and you can take it to another line of that locality, whatever, to try to enhance the whatever vision someone has. And if they're the same locality, right, and you're not making a hybrid or anything like that, like for most locality standards, like that's going to be okay. The people in the retic world, they like retic people are so against the idea of line breeding, and what everybody who gets localities from me wants to do is they immediately want to outcross as soon as possible when we have we have the retic ranch line of Slayers, right?
For what?
so well, I mean, if for on the rare occasion with some of the localities that there are other groups out there, this idea of like taking these animals back together and having a vision with the phenotypic expressions that are different from the other lines, no one is doing it, and I'm doing it with my Calatoa from the wild caught pairing I did, because they produced babies that were high yellow and silver. They were very they weren't your typical brown Calatoa. They had more color. And so people ask me like, hey, are you working with any other lines of Calatoa? Do you have any other, the Reach Dream lines or R&B line or Chris Wilson line? And I say, no, I think I'm going to focus on just enhancing this. And everyone is like, you're going to inbreed? And I'm like, the thing is like the Retic Ranch line, if no one preserves that line and breeds them back together the way that I did in this clutch, you're going to lose a line. And that to me is, when people work on something and they do it for several generations, and then the next generation comes in and they just want to outcross it and not respect the line of an animal, it kind of just infuriates me.
That's a complicated issue in that it's like a lot of things. There's certain topics in the hobby that you almost can't have an intelligent conversation with most herpers because they don't understand it well enough, and they just like, it's like if you talk to them about diseases, like reptile diseases, the conversation never goes well because they don't understand enough to really know what they're basing opinions on things without really a lot of knowledge. And this inbreeding is the other one. It's like what inbreeding does is it reduces genetic diversity. You become similar, more and more similar, and it increases the rate of homozygosity. The odds that you're going to inherit the same version of a gene from both parents because they're more closely related. If all the genes they're inheriting are solid, fully functioning copies, that's not necessarily that big of a problem. If they get a bad copy of a gene that doesn't function very well, and then you get two of the bad copies, then you're really deficient in that area in that gene product, and it might be a problem. And the buildup of those sorts of instances is what causes inbreeding depression. Where the hobby does itself a disservice one of the many ways it does is that this sort of anthropomorphizing too much of these animals. And they think, well, we think that, inbreeding in humans is yucky, so it's bad for snakes. And it's like, that's not, you really need to separate yourself from that. Ask yourself this: why does every snake you can think of come in albino, and all those albinos were found in the wild when albinism is recessive? Why is that? Because snakes routinely, the most likely snake another snake is going to mate with is probably its sister, because they don't have very large ranges.
No.
So that's why this happens so often. And they don't practice any sort of behavioral avoidance for mating with close relatives. Like mammals will do that. Mammals will go out of their way to not breed with their siblings and parents. Reptiles don't give a crap about that. And so, look, albinos all over the place. But you don't see albino moose very often. And if you do, it's on the news. Because it's a rare thing. They don't do that. You don't see albino elephants walking around because they don't do that. But snakes absolutely are not squeamish about that at all. That's why all these recessive mutations come out of the wilds, because two snakes that were closely related to each other bred all the time.
Right.
The fact that there's 50 million retic mutations, mostly all coming out of the wild, like that's to tell you that. Small home ranges.
Especially in the insular islands, right?
Well, insular things, you'll get those people, and there'll be somebody, I'll probably get some hate mail from somebody who listens to this. It's always like the same sort of guy. It's some dude who just took some class in college and thinks he knows everything, and he's going to put you in your place and tell you all the stuff he just learned. And I've run into these sorts of guys a few times and everything, and they'll tell you all the same sort of nonsense about something about, cheetahs are going to become extinct conveniently for their sake of their argument because they're so inbred. And it's like, that's not really, more directed to the point. And I have a paleontology fixation also. Like I told you, super nerd. But are you familiar with Wrangel Island mammoths?
No, but I'd love to hear about them.
Okay, the last mammoth population, the two last surviving populations of woolly mammoths on the planet, or mammoths that we know of, were oddly the Channel Islands off the coast of Los Angeles, and Wrangel Island, which is a decent-sized island north of Siberia, just out in the frozen polar island, and there were mammoths on there until about 3,000 years ago, meaning that like the pyramids of Egypt were 1,000 years old already, and there were still woolly mammoths on the earth. So there were woolly mammoths in the Bronze Age still existed on this island because there were no people ever made to that island.
Right.
And that island became an island and got isolated, and they did a DNA work on. They thought, why these and there's no evidence that people killed them off. They just kind of went extinct naturally. And they're like, prevailing theory was, they must have been so inbred that's why they all died. They were unhealthy because they were inbred. Turns out, nope. And what happened is they were able to calculate, a paper just got published, they were able to calculate how big the founding population of breeding adults was on the island when the point it became reproductively isolated. And it came back as 8. 8 mammoths. That was it. And that 8 mammoths was enough to keep a population going for about 6,000 years with 8 founding individuals. And their genetic health kind of improved in the last few thousand years over time. It got better. The island never supported more than like 350 or 400 mammoths at any one point because it's not that big of a place. But 8. That's about as inbred as you're ever going to possibly get. 8 individuals. But yeah, no, it's islands. Island animals, island population. Well, look at how many island species there are. If inbreeding was that big of a problem, there would be no island species. They get founded by what, 1 or 2 animals, and the whole population stems from that. Like there would be no island species because it's not like 87 freaking pythons showed up on a boat one day and you have they're all super genetically diverse and they set up no. It's like one pregnant female got blown out to sea in a typhoon on a tree branch it was sitting on, and that's what happened. And they're all descended from that, and yet they're fine.
Right.
And that's because it's not necessarily. Now, there's probably cases where this happens, and maybe there is detrimental, deleterious genes in the genome, and they do get so inbred because of the buildup of those deleterious genes in that one founder animal who had that litter of eggs, that clutch of eggs. And it crashes, and we never even knew about it because the population never got established for us to find. But the fact that so many of them do tells you it's not always the end of the world. So yeah, no, it's our own cultural taboos that we keep putting on these animals and think that must be. Also, island populations and super range restricted things like that function as insular island type populations can go through what basically amounts to over time a bit of a genetic purge, where animals in that very small gene pool that do have deleterious genes tend to not live.
They die.
Until what you end up with is kind of a purified strain, and the only thing left is the ones that didn't have those genes because those ones all died off.
So and that's what I've talked about with people is like, as you start to line breed, right? If you start to see some inbreeding depression, we as hobbyists do the neglectful, unethical thing and will force feed or do whatever it takes in order to make that money and to sell that animal. And we don't allow kind of natural selection to happen in our buildings or in our garage.
No.
Or
you guys are retic guys. You guys apparently the thing you do is you take a straight razor and you slice the chainsaw the top of the egg off completely. You can wait for them to hatch. So you're really getting kind of Darwinian on that. Like, well, it's like everybody hatches, everybody eats, everybody breeds. And if there's any of these things that they shouldn't have necessarily made it, there's no barrier to survival and reproduction because there's a female for every male and a male for every female. And everybody's getting out of the egg just fine. Doesn't matter if you didn't form an egg tooth or not. You're getting out of the egg because I'm going to cut you out of that egg. And we've done it with our own species. We've domesticated ourselves. What did we do with humans? We removed all the barriers to our own reproduction. Like, what's the limiting factor on human population? Just the carrying capacity of the earth, I guess.
I was going to say condoms.
If we were in the Pleistocene, if it was just 12,000 years ago, anybody with corrective lenses would be dead. Because you'd have to be eaten by the first saber-toothed cat that came along and you couldn't see it fast enough. You'd be dead. So bad eyesight is ruthlessly pruned out of the gene pool, isn't it?
Right.
Ruthlessly. But now, more than 50% of people wear corrective lenses because you don't get eaten by a saber-toothed cat because there's no predators anymore because we removed that threat, and now everybody is free to reproduce and pass our genes along for bad eyesight. I say that as a person who has reluctantly had to accept the fact that I need these now in my old age. But I'm just saying, like,
yeah, I got contacts on right now, so
3 out of 3. Go figure, right? Like it's like it's no longer but we would all have been eaten by a freaking cave bear or something. Right. There's no barrier anymore. We're doing this with our snakes. So we're probably making them less fit because that survival of the fittest, and now it's not survival of the fittest, not with humans, not with our snakes. I think it's survival of all. Well, that includes the unfit that then pass those unfit genes along. So I'm not going to start culling a bunch of snakes either. I'm with you. I do the same. I don't cut the top of the eggs off, but I work my ass off to get them all to eat, and we all do that because we're animal lovers at heart, I think, and we don't.
Right.
It is an absurdity how much time I will spend getting a stubborn, non-feeding, defective snake to eat. Like a snake with a mild kink in its back or something, but it could eat and live a normal life. So I'll spend a year assist feeding it to get the damn thing to eat so I can give it away for free to somebody because I'm too soft and I can't just put it down.
Right.
Like, if it can survive, I get it to survive and I just give it away. Usually to somebody as a pet or something or whatever. But I'm like, but yeah, so I'm guilty of this myself.
Right. Right. I will say that, I mean, Retic specifically with their food response and everything, I've kind of stopped the force feeding process of it. And that's also because in captivity, you're dealing with a clutch of 24, plus eggs, and obviously there's animals and Retics that have less, but when you're talking about the growth rate of these animals too, it's just something that you have to consider in regards to how much effort you're going to put into force feeding these animals. And especially for an animal that comes out of the egg wanting to eat. I'll offer it live. I'll offer it chicks. I'll offer it quail. I'll offer it rats, mice, whatever, right? Live or frozen thawed. But I've kind of checked off the force feeding aspect. I still really want it to survive. Like I really do. But when you you talked about it before, the overproduction of retics, and when you have, 3-4 clutches a year, but that equals in captivity, 100 babies.
Yeah, as you know, you guys know better than anybody, certainly better than me. It's like, yeah, you have a baby retic and you feed it 3 times. Now it needs a CB70 because it grew 2 feet after 3 meals. There's unimaginable growth rate at converting food into just like length. It's so
But what's crazy too is when you deal with the insular dwarfism stuff, and that's what really separates them. Like the calatoas that I have here, and even the coyotes that I hatch, they do not they don't grow like that. Unless you pump them with food, right? You can get any retic to grow like if you shove food down their throat, but obviously you don't want to do that. But some of these smaller retics have I mean, from my observation, they do have a slower growth rate that first year because you can absolutely get a mainland retic, 8 to 10 feet in 1 year if you really want to.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not the healthy thing to do, but it can be done. I promise you're not going to be getting a super dwarf, 4 or 5 foot in 1 year. I guarantee you that.
Adult size is one of those things that I noticed, so I started keeping an eye out for retics and looking at ads and that kind of stuff, which I never used to do. And
it's annoying.
Like everybody just puts like nonsensical stuff. Like every ad seems to want to tell you how big the parents were. It's like that. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I guess because snakes are indeterminate growers, meaning they never stop growing ever. It just slows down past a certain point. So if you just keep feeding them, there's no magical point at which it just, I've achieved this size. I guess I'm done growing now. Mammals are genetically limited in their growth. You're not going to get taller if you keep eating. You might get fatter. You will not get taller. You top out at what your genes dictate you're going to top out at. That snake's going to never stop growing. It might slow down, but you just keep. I mean, I had 2 adult female coyotes from the first captive bred clutch ever produced in the U.S., and they were 10 feet long. I saw them when they were like 4 feet long, and the guy got a trio, and then he gave me, I killed one of them, but you can have the other 2 because I'm moving. He gives them to me. It turned out it was 2 girls. This is like 20 years ago.
Oh, that sucks.
And they're like 10 feet long. I'm like, what the hell? Why are they 10 feet long? And why is that Jampia retic like 16 feet long? Why is it 16 feet long? Oh, it just got big. It's like, no, you fed it a shitload of food and made it that big. Like they're brown retics. The only thing they had going for them is they're little tiny snakes. Like, why would you do that? It's the one thing they had. It's like, yeah, it's the dwarfism in retics is about 50% environmental and not that much genetic. There is no hard stop. So the size of adult snakes doesn't really matter. You could get the smallest adults ever. If you keep hammering that thing, it's going to grow way bigger than its parents.
I mean, I think the relevance of putting adult size on ads, for me, it's like if that animal is 10 plus years old, right? And again, sure, you can pound it and everything, but let's assume that they're not. I think that it's good information to have, like, hey, I have like a true adult retic and not a 5-year-old breeder who still has probably another 3-4 years of like steady growth that it's going to do before it really halts.
Well, it never totally halts is the thing.
Well, not halts like as a dead stop, but until that growth rate starts to slow down dramatically.
My current crusade is to get people to just give up on this idea of maximum size. What's the maximum size? There's no such thing as the maximum. There's literally no such thing. I saw a damn 5-foot spotted python. Must have been 20 years ago.
Oh my god.
I'm sure it didn't live much longer after me seeing it, but god damn, it was impressive. It was absolutely impressive. Another show is that guy had a Honduran milk snake. I thought it was a ringed python. I could not, it was bigger than my forearm. I could not believe how big this thing was. I'm sure it's long dead, but it's like, it was impressive, unhealthy, doomed to die young, but it got that big if you just keep hammering it. I think,
one of the first boa constrictors I saw at a local show here must have been like this big around and thrown over my neck. And
do you think it's alive anymore? Because it's not. Like, it's, and boas
no.
live 40, 50 years, but not that one.
Right.
This is the thing. I think what we need the hobby to move away from this idea of a maximum size that doesn't exist, and to think more in terms of a healthy adult size. So if you have a dwarf retic, the healthy adult size is smaller, isn't it? It is an adult at a smaller size. It is mature at a smaller size. It is healthy at the smaller size, but it'll still keep going if you feed it.
Yeah.
It'll take longer to get there, but you'll still get to a stupid size on the dead snake prematurely.
No, I've been talking about, and you could ask Nathan too. I've been talking about a lot on our Discord and our Patreon, and I've even said it several times on the podcast, but reversing insular dwarfism is way easier than it took for them to have insular dwarfism.
I think what you see with some, what we call dwarfs, like the retics, are not fully dwarfs in the sense that you have a bit of a genetic component to their size, and you also have an environmental component. And the environmental component is what's driving the genetic component over time. The reason why they get downsized is because there's nothing big to eat on that particular island. So there's no point in outgrowing your food supply. If there's not a steady supply of deer or wild pigs or whatever it is you're eating on Sunderland, mainland retics, that whole group, then it doesn't make sense to outgrow your food supply. You could downsize rather rapidly. And if that maintains for long enough time, you eventually start to see genetic changes. And you're getting to a genetic components to dwarfism when you start seeing smaller eggs. And in particular, shorter incubation times. And that's when okay, they're breeding smaller, they're laying smaller eggs, and the eggs are hatching into shorter incubation windows. That's when, look at like a Tannenbar python, the dwarf scrub python, and that is a real dwarf. Yet I know somebody at the Woodland Park Zoo that had a 10-foot long pair, and I'm like, are you out of your freaking mind? But it's a zoo guy. And what do zoo guys do? They go by the schedule, and it says you feed all the snakes every week, whether they need it or not. 10 damn feet. For the record, I was the second person in the world to breed Tannenbar pythons. VPI beat me by 1 year. I bred them the very next year. And the male I bred weighed 490 grams.
That's
490
nuts.
grams. He was this big around and ate, not even like a small rat, like a barely weaned rat. It looked like he ate a turkey. It was so big. And the female, this was scrub python, she weighed 900 grams. 900 grams. And I had another male that I used to combat the two, and he showed interest in breeding at 250 grams. That is a scrub python that was eating large hopper mice. And he would go up there and try to get near the female, and the bigger male would just chase him away because the sub 500 gram male saw him as a rival. And I produced a clutch of viable eggs from a pair that small.
That's
insane. And the eggs are the size of carpet pythons, and they hatch in 59 to 60 days, not the 80 days of a regular scrub python.
And then
So
you look at it
a little bit longer, but the retics they're probably between those 2 points where they're not quite as much genetically dwarfed. The environmental component is still a big driver of it, but they're starting to see genetic changes. Their eggs are not going to be as big. The babies are smaller. I don't know. I've not bred them yet, but I'm going to assume they incubate faster.
My Kaiwati and Kalatoa clutches both took 82 days. My Philippine clutch took 89. My Solaire clutch actually took 90 days.
What are you cooking them
at? 87.
Okay, well, you were cooking on a bit on the cooler side of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. Like Eric Lee, his Super Dwarf stuff hatches like almost every single year at 78. I tend to 87.5 at like the hottest is generally what I keep my incubator at. I'm practicing for the green tree pythons.
If you extend that analogy of smaller body size for pythons getting smaller and smaller and smaller and having shorter and shorter incubation times, guess what pythons have the shortest incubation time of all? Antaresia. Go figure. And chondro.
What is it, like 40 days? Yeah, 50 days?
Yeah, I've seen at least one children's python pop out at like 39 days. Chondros are also no bigger than Chondros are not supposed to be really any bigger than Antaresia. They grow them way too big, but that's a whole other argument. But they are little tiny snakes that really shouldn't ever exceed 500 grams either, and they lay a little tiny egg that cooks really super fast.
Dude, I saw a chondro egg for the first time at Bill's, and I literally thought it was a freaking jelly bean.
Also, think about this. Another reason for that is predation drives these sorts of things. What these animals or species are doing is they're retaining the embryos until internally longer. So when they lay the egg, it's more developed at the point they laid it. So it has to develop less time outside. Think about like if a big ass retic, let's say, a 12-foot, 14-foot retic in the wild is sitting on a clutch of, well, let's be generous, 37 eggs. There's not many things that are going to mess with that big ass snake. There's probably something that might, but she is pretty able to defend that clutch of eggs, one would think. Now, is a little Jampiensis that's 5.5 feet long, is it going to be able to defend itself very well when something wants to take its eggs or eat it while it's vulnerable? No. And that tiny Tanibar python, it's really defenseless. It is not very equipped to defend. It can't defend itself and its eggs. So you're incentivizing, hurry up and get this over with as quickly as possible.
Right.
Cook these things fast and get back up in the trees where you're safe. Chondros, this idea that chondros and these things are like nesting in tree hollows is a bunch of nonsense. Like I found chondros in the wild. I found, what lives in tree hollows in the rainforest in Australia? It isn't chondros. It's big ass birds and big ass monitor lizards. A tree hollow in a rainforest is like the penthouse apartment. It is the most deluxe zip code you can possibly have. That is the most desirable place you could possibly ever live. And no little ass snake is going to be able to hold down the fort in a tree hollow. They're just not. They're going to get eaten by the first big bird, big monitor, or bigger snake that's going to come along. So they're laying their eggs on the ground where they're super vulnerable. So if you get it done in 40 days and you get back up to safety, that's higher survival. A big retic can afford, or a big rock python can afford a long incubation period because they're a big snake that can defend itself. They can get away with it a bit longer.
Right.
For the record, I did just breed African rock pythons. I'm trying to think. My female's probably not more than 8 feet long, so they don't need to be very big either. Like the male's all of 7 feet long.
Yeah, that's pretty damn small.
Yeah, right.
That's real small.
They're 10 years old.
Attitude makes up for the size difference.
Yeah, their attitude makes up for it.
You know what? Like I worry about them way less than those Salars.
Dude, Nathan, I was Nathan, I was talking
little snakes, but you could tell like you're gonna stand your ground and bite me. Like I could tell. Like,
they're confident. The female that I kept back, she's a sweetheart, but I handle my babies a lot. But once they hit about a year old, that's where just having a lot of snakes, you don't really have the time to. I'll tell you,
I've never touched them with my bear skin ever. Those Salars, I got them out of the containers with hooks, and I use hooks. I don't wear gloves, but I have never actually touched them physically ever. They sit on their stick most of the time. They eat anything I've ever offered them. They eat when they're in shed. They're just savages, but they're dicks. They have no use for me at all.
What's crazy is that's the same thing with the other locality that I most recently produced. They're kind of that same behavior when they're younger, and same with the ternates and the Halmas. But man, every single baby from my Jampianus, the two Jampianus subspecies localities that I produce, not a mean bone in their body. Like they don't bite. They just don't.
I have a pair. They don't bite either. They pee on you though. I'd rather they just bite me, honestly.
Sometimes.
Like I'd rather just get bit. I actually prefer the stand your ground and try to bite me. It's like, I know what the deal is. You're going to be a jerk. I expect it. It'll be fine. The unpredictable flailing around and or peeing is like,
Yeah. They all got their own little way of showing you that they care.
But I have a lot of scrub pythons. I'm perfectly fine with the super aggressive snake that's just never going to calm down. All right, cool. I'm okay with it. I'll just not even going to I'm not even willing to try to calm you down. I don't care. I'll just accept them for what they are.
Right, exactly. Nick, I want to ask a wrap-up question about taxonomy as it pertains to reticulated pythons. So right now there are 3 subspecies. I'm curious as to how many you think, are. So I mean, we find out that there's retics in Cambodia and all these different places. I mean, realistically, at least from what we have in the U.S. or what you've seen in the U.S. and overseas, I mean, is there a number that you would put, or do you like? You don't have to talk about the localities if you want to keep this a thing, but I'm curious.
This was published. Speculating on other species gets a bit like I don't know if you're familiar with the Drake equation, but for calculating how many intelligent civilizations there'd be in the galaxy based on math. It's like a bit like that. You'd be like trying to figure out how many habitable islands that they occur on and what are the odds. You could venture a guess if you put a lot of study into it.
At least from known.
Yeah,
right?
Lucas, are these islands in the Goldilocks zone?
There is a huge population of them that are absolutely a different species. The Philippine retics are not reticulatus. They're not even a subspecies. They appear to be a full species, and it's not even close. Like they're a different snake. They are a different. You have a well-defined eastern and western clade. Although really, it's more like a southeastern and a northeastern and a southwestern clade, really. But because the Philippines is kind of up here, but
yeah,
the Philippine retics are way off on their own. They are not reticulatus. Where the line between subspecies and species, that's up to whoever to just make up whatever arbitrary definition they choose to, but they are clearly a different snake. Clearly. They are far more different from all the others than the others are from each other that everybody mostly accepts. They're a different snake.
Right.
And that tracks with everything else. Yeah, you know what else is endemic to the Philippines? Pretty much everything that lives in the Philippines. It's like everything that lives there is its own thing. And the retics are not special or different. Like the same rules that cause speciation patterns and monitor lizards and mammals and all this other stuff affects them too. And so where you find if everything on this island, you'll see the same sort of patterns, I guess, is what I'm saying. So
right.
It gets a bit wonky with the Halmahera retics, and there's a little chain of islands that almost connects Halmahera to the southern Philippines. They're little tiny islands. They're you could see where animals could island hop given enough time and get there. And that appears to more or less be what is the case. The Halmahera retics are very closely related to the Philippine retics. Mm-hmm. They're not exactly the same as the Philippine retics.
Their heads are very similar.
They're probably the same species as the unnamed Philippine species. You could maybe make an argument that they're a subspecies of that species, but that's like, since there's no rules as to how different enough is different enough for each of these ranks, it's just entirely up to whoever bothers to do it, I guess, and write the paper. But the Philippine retics are a different thing. It's pretty clear,
right?
Pretty clear. But the paper that found that at the molecular level and did that work wasn't trying to classify a new species of retic. It was a paper looking into mostly the sustainability of harvesting all these retic skins. And what would the effect be if there were different populations that are probably different snakes, but they're all considered one snake, and the effect on the ecology of these animals in the wild when you're harvesting skins from all these things that may not be the same thing.
Right.
So their paper was on the ecology on that angle. It wasn't really their goal to divide it up into species, but that was kind of like something they discovered in the process of doing that paper.
Can you send me that paper, by the way?
Yeah.
That would be freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty easy reading. Some of those papers get pretty, difficult. Most of the stuff I got to read a couple of times. This one wasn't too bad, but it tracks. If you look at where Halmahera is, it's literally all the way across the other line. It's like in a place where you shouldn't have Asian fauna at all. It's like now they've crossed a couple of different biogeographical lines to get over there. Of course, they're different. The odds of they're one of the only things that can get there.
Right.
You find what you find in biogeographically speaking, in terms of dispersal, species of snake that are arboreal disperse really well, and species that are terrestrial not so much for obvious reasons. So if you look at like something like a retic, they're all over all those islands. And then once you cross Weber's line into Papua and Australia, scrub pythons are all across those islands. And they basically, a scrub python and a retic are doing the same job. They're analogs for each other. That's why they can't really coexist, because they're two big ass arboreal snakes doing the same thing.
Right.
So they exclude each other. They evolved to do the same job that retics are doing on the other side of those lines. The exception of that being like ambon and halmahera, where you have scrub pythons and retics. But there's a reasonable chance that for sure the ambon retics are probably almost certainly human introduced and aren't supposed to be there at all. And that also could possibly explain the halmahera retics being there,
right,
as well.
I've almost wondered about the evolutionary process of their much darker color, and because they're on an island that is a massive volcano.
That sort of stuff. There's a tendency in the hobby to, and sometimes historically in taxonomy and in academia too, where there's an assumed correlation between your genotype and your phenotype, and oftentimes there isn't. So you can have a really pronounced phenotypic difference in the way something looks, and it is not reflected at all in their genome whatsoever.
Okay.
If you looked at any two humans on Earth, you can get some pretty different looking people, can't you? You get someone from sub-Saharan Africa and someone from, I don't know, Taiwan. They look completely different. But there isn't two shits difference at the molecular level at all. All the characteristics that we call race in humans, not to push any hot buttons or anything, but it's just true. All the things that we think make people look different, hair color, eye color, skin pigment, that's like 12 genes, and that's literally it. It has no reflection on like the deeper divergences between humans. There's almost nothing. It's just a small number of genes make a massive difference. But we as snake breeders who breed morphs know this. You've got retic morphs where one single copy, not a recessive, a single allele at one locus, completely a single incomplete dominant, one copy of one gene completely changes the entire paint job, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You got dozens of things like that where one allele. If you tested the animal with that gene and the one without, they would key out as being identical. No difference whatsoever at a molecular level at all, but they look completely differently. Mm-hmm. So your genotype, if your genotype differs, that is indicative of like a longer term separation event where these things have been on their own and not exchanging genes for a very long time to have genetic drift to have taken hold, and they have evolved differently. But you can have very, very rapid differences in color and pattern that don't really reflect any deep genomic differences. One or two, look at Tanimbar pythons that have evolved in real time in the last 200 years. The ancestral Tanimbar pythons are supposed to be gold, patternless, kind of bark pattern. They're really beautiful. But the most common animal in Tanimbar today is a patternless exanthic. It's a freaking double recessive. I was one of the people that proved that both those genes, was involved in proving that both of those genes are double recessive. How do you get to where it'd be like if a snow boa was the most common boa in Nicaragua was a snow? That's what you're talking about. A patternless exanthic, and both genes are recessive. And the absolute rarest color phase of the four varieties is the one that doesn't have either gene. Is a pattern gold. They're rare as rocking horse shit. And literally, and I bred a bunch of Tanimbar pythons. Every single wild.
Did you just say rare as rocking horse shit?
Yeah, a friend of mine in the UK always says that. I think
that's great.
But the rarest thing is the thing is the default normal is the rarest thing, and the most common is the double recessive in the wild. And every patterned Tanimbar python that comes into the wild that's ever been bred, every single one that anyone's ever bred that was wild proved to be het for patternless, and every gold one that ever came out of the wild that was bred proved to be het for exanthic. Those genes are in the process of completely taking over that island. And why that chain? Why would that be the case? Fun fact, the Tanimbar archipelago is 94% deforested.
Oh,
almost all the forest is cut down. So if you're supposed to be patterned and camouflage, live in a type of tree, and the trees are all cut down and now you're living in a pile of rocks, maybe being patternless and gray is more effective.
Right.
Because the trees are gone, because we cut them all down. Same reason Goffin's cockatoos, which they would undoubtedly eat, which is a dwarf cockatoo, lives in the exact same place. They're endangered because we cut all the trees down. The same stuff.
This guy's an encyclopedia. It's amazing.
That's why these things happen, and that's something that's happening very rapidly in real time. So the difference in like you can have rapid changes in the outward appearance of something, in the paint job of an animal in just a couple of generations. I made black and white jungle carpets just for a goof in my house, just cause. Like it's like but they're not any different genetically at any deep, meaningful level. It's just surface level stuff.
Right.
It isn't indicative of any speciation or anything. So you got to be typically and sometimes you'll get species that look very similar that are genetically very different, but they don't look that different. So there's not really a lot of concordance between genotype and phenotype in a lot of cases.
Right. Nick, on that note, I want to thank you for coming on and as you would say, ramble, but this was like the most I've learned in any episode that we've ever recorded. So I appreciate it.
Kind of forget that we're supposed to be talking about retics and stuff.
No. I mean, this was a lot bigger than retics.
I didn't just going off about Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis.
No, I'm happy we went down that road.
Ties into stuff we've been talking about recently, and Lucas says this every once in a while to our guests, but this one I definitely believe we'll have you on sooner rather than later to keep diving into this topic, because I mean, we just scratched so surface level even with all that we covered tonight.
Right. Yeah. He did a lot of pausing, looking up and explaining it like we were 8, right? Like I kind of want like
I'm just trying I'm thinking more of like this stuff has been fascinating me for most of my entire adult life, and this is why I'm still in the hobby. Why I never got uninterested and quit is because I got interested in the kind of the deeper science side of it, and that kept me going. Because if it was just breed pretty snake in a plastic box, I would have got bored.
Right.
It's this other stuff that keeps me interested and engaged. So I had to separate I understand all these things, but to a lot of people that have never even thought about this kind of stuff, I'm trying to struggle to kind of find a way to explain it in a way that people can, okay, well, that makes sense, and use analogies.
Yeah, I mean,
get around and that kind of stuff.
Or just
I'm thankful for it. Exactly. But Nick, before we kick you out to the back studio, do you mind just sharing your social media plugs and your website where people can find you?
Yeah, I'm the world's easiest guy to find, and I'm super old, so if you just call me, I'll totally answer the phone and talk to you. But
careful what you ask for.
Yeah, now I spend a lot of time answering.
It's great
questions. Don't call me if you could have just Googled the answer though. Don't do that to me. But inlandreptile.com has been my website for 25, 30 years now. It's always there. And I actually keep it updated, which is kind of crazy these days. Remember when everybody had a website? It was no big deal. It was like having a business card.
Yeah, no one does.
And then social media just like, oh, I can set up a Facebook page in 5 minutes. Like, so then everybody has a website. But then if you're the guy that actually has a website with like an availability page, it's always up to date. Like I added 40 things to it earlier today. That's what I was doing right before the show. Like it becomes
better. You better not have added those 2 animals.
Now. It's because nobody does that. If you're the guy that does the thing nobody does, you win. So now it's great. So I'd like to discourage everybody from having a website and keeping it updated. Don't do that.
Right.
I'll just be the only one. But I'm easy to find. Inland Reptile on Facebook. I'm super old, so I don't use a lot of other social media platforms. I think there's probably an age cutoff. I have an Instagram page just under my name, Nick Mutton, only because I set it up in a bout of insomnia some years ago, right after Facebook bought Instagram, and I was like 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I'm farting around on my phone. And they just kept asking me, you want to set up an Instagram page? You want to set up an Instagram page? Oh, okay, sure. And I did, and then I forgot about it for like 3 years. And I finally opened it up again. I had like 1 million messages from people that thought I was a jerk for never responding. Because I forgot I even did it. But occasionally on Instagram, always on Facebook, my personal page, and just Nick Mutton. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, man. Again, we're going to have you on soon. We'll talk more about this stuff, and appreciate having you on, dude.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Take it easy.
See you, Nick.
That was a lot. That was great. That was a lot.
The girl I'm talking to, I'm like, hey, I like very rarely listen back to episodes because she's a snake keeper too. So I'm like, I don't know which one to show you. This is one that I'm going to have to actually like re-listen to a couple times just to like fully digest everything
in.
There was like, he does so well in just making it digestible, but there's so much information coming at you that like, yeah, I need to reabsorb the other little bits.
Right. What was really cool about the episode is being able to reflect on, like, he was talking about things that we recently read in the Complete Reticulated Python, which was really cool. But
yeah,
Yeah. Anyways, guys, as we wrap up again, hit that link below. Patreon.com/the Retic Lounge. Come join our pop-in Discord. We have a great time here. Actually, this Sunday, Nathan's going to be holding the fort down by himself because I'm going to be in Michigan, but we will catch you guys on episode 115 next Friday.
See you then.